Hello, everyone. My name is Erin Beal, the talent development evangelist here at Growthspace, and I'm going to be your host for today's 30 minutes of growth session. So welcome back to all of you dedicated L&D and HR professionals who are right here, right now, practicing exactly what you preach and dedicating some time to your own growth and development. And a warm welcome, of course, to any of you who are joining our series for the very first time. Our goal in these 30-minute learning sessions is simply to get you in, get you out, and leave you with a bit of inspiration and some practical tips and tools that you can implement right away in your day-to-day work. So today's 30 minutes of growth discussion is all about building exceptional leaders in any work environment, whether that environment is in office or remote or some hybrid combination of both. We all know that the world of work changed very drastically for many of us about 4 years ago, but here we are in 2024, and we're still talking about it. I saw an article earlier just this week, actually. It was a CNBC article that stated 74% of companies have changed their hybrid work policies multiple times since 2020. So, we're sitting here with these questions, and it's no wonder that we're still trying to, piece together all these lessons learned and figure out what are the right policies and procedures to put in place? What are the right ways to support our leaders and engage our teams and all of that? So today, we are diving into exactly that with three incredible panelists who share a wealth of experience in building exceptional leaders. So first up, I'd like to introduce you to Leeza Frantz, former SVP of People and Culture at Synthago. Leeza specializes in scaling company infrastructure and building high-performance teams. As a tenured HR executive, she's been recognized for her ability to leverage data and align HR initiatives with ever-evolving business needs. So Leeza, incredible, important skills needed to navigate this remote, this world of remote and hybrid work, right?
Yes,
thank
absolutely.
You for joining
thank you, Erin.
Today.
It's an honor to be here.
Thank you for joining. Also joining us today is Kerry Olin, who recently retired as a VP of HR at Microsoft. So Kerry, congratulations on your retirement. With over 40 years of experience at Microsoft and Procter & Gamble, Kerry now focuses on advisory roles, guiding executive leaders in culture change, organizational performance, leadership effectiveness, talent management, and merger integration. So Kerry, welcome. We're excited to have you here today.
Thanks, Erin.
And last but not least, I'd like to introduce you to Tom Goulet. So as a seasoned HR executive with 30 plus years of experience across diverse industries, including environmental engineering, aerospace, life sciences, and automotive. Tom has held key roles in blue chip organizations such as Allied Signal Honeywell, Perkin-Elmer, Thermo Fisher Scientific, and Truck Hero. So welcome, Tom. We're excited to have you joining the panel as well.
Thank you, Erin.
Perfect. All right. Well, in the interest of time, let's dive right into our questions. So, Kerry, I'm gonna point this first one over to you because coming from Microsoft, working with a very large organization who's been kind of navigating the global environment of hybrid work for many years, what would you say are the key learnings that came out of Microsoft when it comes to remote and hybrid leadership? What are some of the things that worked or what didn't? Tell us your stories.
Yeah, sure. Although, I appreciate that you're an evangelist, although you started by saying 40 years of experience. You didn't have to say that out loud about me, but we'll let that go. And even though it's true, what worked pretty well for Microsoft was a lot of planning and intentionality. And what did not work particularly well were rules. And it's interesting, even though it's a company of 1,000 people, the work contexts, environments, roles are very different. And, it's very difficult to codify this kind of thing. But I think three things stood out for us. Number one, the importance of creating and modeling behavioral norms. So I'll give you a very simple example. Team agreements. Let's say I'm in a work group. When will we be in the office? When will we have meetings together? When is it okay to be on camera, off camera, you name it. But the key here is agreements, not rules. Lots of experimentation.
I love that.
Leveraging technology. leaders who say they value people's off work time, but tend to send emails at 10 p.m. at night in somebody's work, it's not helpful, right? And so using simple functionality like, kind of outbox rules about when things can be sent. That means I can work when I want, but I don't have to necessarily impose my work schedule on somebody else. So again, these behavioral norms are important. Making in-person work matter. In my experience, it is beyond frustrating to be asked to be in a workplace and have it to be essentially no different than if I was remote. I go into my office, I do a commute, and I sit in front of the same computer. It's just not helpful. So when people come together, and people need to come together, let's design those agendas intentionally. Let's over-index on social connection, community, those kinds of things. And then the last I would say is investing in basic management practices. The world of management didn't just all of a sudden change, but certain things actually require more intentionality, like goal setting, for example. And we may talk about a few more of these things. I'll end with one 30-second example. My last manager, Microsoft's chief HR officer, when everybody started coming back to work, we had a team agreement. And that was her leadership team would be we met every week. We'd be in person the first Monday of every month. And that was remarkably helpful. I live in Dallas now, and so I wanted to be in Redmond once a week. I picked that week, and I could plan. It was, et cetera. And and then we tuned that agenda for more sensitive topics, and maybe other weeks when we weren't all in person, we didn't. So it's just a very simple but powerful example of what intentionality can do.
I love that. I love what you said about, agreements, not rules, and really making teams feel like they are empowered to make some decisions and decide. You talked about purpose, right? That you have, if you're in person, there needs to be a purpose for it. So it's them deciding, well, what are the topics that we need to have in person, and what's that cadence? So I love that. So Tom, I'm gonna direct this next question to you, because some of what Kerry was mentioning, he said, there's kind of that difference between the company policies and procedures, but then at the next level, managers have responsibilities for their individual team. So I'm curious from your perspective, what are some of the main adaptations required for a leader in order to navigate, a remote or hybrid environment successfully?
Yeah, well, I think Terry did a really good job. I mean, the norms of the organization are really important. Some people refer to it as kind of the culture, building that culture. And cultures had to shift a little bit related to this hybrid remote and in-plant, in-office individuals within the organization. So I think it's really incumbent upon the company to kind of set that bar for great communications, consistent communication to the overall organization related to where we're at and where we're going. I think there needs to also be living the values. The organization has to live the values. If the organization is remote and you don't have a lot of opportunities to touch those individuals, if there's hypocrisy going on in the organization, it really destroys that trust and that culture, right? So I think that's clear. And I think also the mission, the vision, the mission, the strategy, then going to the higher level goals of the organization really needs to set the leaders up for success related to kind of creating that foundation. So that's what I would say from kind of an organizational perspective. From a leader perspective, taking that down to kind of the next level of leading people within this more complex world of ours. First of all, really think about the technology. And, I think Kerry mentioned the word intentionality, and you'll probably hear that a lot today. Being really intentional about the technology used and talking with your people. How do you want to make an impact with those individuals? Because you get very few of those, especially with people who are remote. So what kind of, are you going to use Teams? Are you going to use Zoom? Are you going to use in person? Obviously there's the text and the email, but you got to think very intentionally about how you are communicating message and what is the best tool to use. Hiring is more critical than ever as far as assessing talent and making sure that you're getting people who are self-starters if they're remote. You can't be sitting there as a manager thinking about, oh, I'm worrying about this individual getting their job done all the time if they're remote. You need people who actually are results oriented and are self-starters. So I think really thinking through that process is very important. In the onboarding, you got people that are all remote from each other. How do you ensure that people are on board and really become part of something? Because if you're sitting there in an office all the time remote, you may not feel part of that organization. So the onboarding process for new people joining are very important. But I also think people who are promoted, especially people promoted leaders, we need to do a better job also on onboarding them into those new roles. That's very important. Sometimes it's missed. And I think really it's, Kerry mentioned this too, but aligning around the SMART goals and being able to cascade those through your group and find the interdependencies and how people should be working together. I think those are all absolutely critical areas for leaders and driving in this very complex structure.
I love that. Thank you. And I love that you touched on the SMART goals, because that's a perfect segue into my next question that I'm going to direct over to Leeza. So, we talked about when it comes to the responsibilities of the leader, there is a piece around really focusing on the metrics and goals and making sure people are meeting their KPIs. But when I think about that, I feel that that's really a common challenge among, remote leaders is understanding whether their team are actually being as productive as they need to be. So Leeza, I'm going to ask you this next question. How can leaders, think about goal setting, and how can leaders ensure that people are meeting their goals and KPIs regardless of their environment, remote, hybrid, what have you?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Erin. So first of all, one of the core tenets of successful business performance, I think it really relies on the formalization and transparency when it comes to all processes. And this is especially true for goal setting. It does seem like goal setting in general, especially at the executive level, it sometimes feels like a black box to the employees. So this is where the executive team specifically needs to be very intentional about articulating not just the what employees should be are being expected to do, but also the why and the how. And these company goals are actually the perfect opportunity to tie things back to what Tom was saying, the mission and the vision of the company. And it sets the North Star for the subsequent cascade, which will likely take place through the OKR process, which also has the obviously the benefit of highlighting the interdependencies between different teams. And Tom mentioned technology. I think that especially in this day and age, we're so fortunate because we have technology to help enhance the accountability and the transparency. We have a lot of project management tools that can assign owners, track progress, track deadlines, as well as very robust performance management systems for monitoring, specifically SMART goals, which I feel like they really need to be integrated into the regular review process. A lot of times I've noticed there tends to be a disconnect between what the employee is doing day to day, and then there's no direct connectivity to how it ties back to the actual business objectives for the company. And I think we need to fundamentally try to use data anywhere we can, from dashboards to metrics, and really make that reporting transparent. Make sure that regardless of the location of the employee base, there is visibility. Like, for example, if you have a robust manufacturing or operating center, I think there can be a tendency to maybe track key metrics, maybe on a whiteboard somewhere. But all of these things should really be published so that the entire company would have visibility into how different departments are performing. And I think effective and transparent communication is really key here. I mean, there's regular check-ins, then one-on-ones and team meetings. that that managers should strive to have, and really keeping those lines of communication open, whether it is in person, via Zoom, via Slack, via email, but really making sure that everybody's using those channels. But one important point I wanted to make about communication is that it needs to be a two-way street. So a personal example that I wanted to highlight is one of the things that we implemented at my last company is actually monthly goals meetings with scorecards showcasing performance against company goals and critical milestones. And this is so that the employees can actually see how the company is faring. So it's not just them that are being judged for their performance. And it helps tie back the personal efforts of employees to the bigger picture. And then one other key tenet I wanted to mention is accountability and responsibility. Those need to be fostered. And as Tom mentioned, onboarding is the critical phase in the employee life cycle where the cultural values and values indoctrination actually starts taking place. And having that clear framework from the get-go that outlines and documents expectations that is shared with individual employees and then the teams is absolutely critical. And you need to really encourage team members to take ownership. And this means coaching managers to actually release some of that control, especially new managers. One of the things that I did earlier in my career, especially when it came to, preparing for executive updates, I wanted to control every word, every font, and because I was super concerned about optics, but then I realized I wasn't really doing my team any favors. I was detracting from their learning cycle. So I really learned to let go and just do a final check before those decks kind of see the light of day. But that was a huge learning for me, and I think a lot of people would be able to relate to that.
Aaron, just one follow up to Leeza. Yeah. She made some awesome points, but I think one area is over indexing though on metrics. I've seen organizations do this where they're measuring and measuring and measuring, and some of it is very meaningful and some of it is not so meaningful. And I think that needs to be something that the organization really looks at and works with the managers on making sure that there are few and very impactful metrics and not trying to measure everything. So just one thing that I've seen where organizations sometimes will overdo it.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think that ties back to kind of what Leeza was mentioning at the beginning of her answer when she's talking about really taking every opportunity to reinforce the why behind, so that really helps people feel connected to the company goals and really understanding how their day-to-day work ties back to that, and what are just those few key objectives, right, that they're able to move the needle on, and they're going to see that connection. It's like, gosh, like because I did this, the company is seeing success here. So I think, like you said, that connection is really important, but narrowing it into what are actually the priorities, what are actually the things that are most important. So thank you for sharing that commentary. Okay, so at the start of this call, when the chat was not working, I asked everyone in the audience to share top 3 skills that remote leaders or hybrid leaders need to have. So just now looking at the chat, I can see a lot of answers in there. We have a lot of things around communication, empathy, team building, focusing on results, accountability, two-way dialogue. So a lot of great skills that all leaders need to have. So I want to open that question to the panelists as well and ask you. So let's pretend, if I were a brand new manager or maybe a seasoned leader who's stepping into a new role in a hybrid or remote environment, what do you feel are the skills that I should focus on as a new leader in terms of development?
Aaron, I think one of the things is really around the EQ skills of the leader. Because you've got people remote, you've got to really take advantage of the time you have with those individuals. So I think really understanding what makes them tick, how do they like to be rewarded? How do they like to be communicated to? What's a little bit about their own personal background in their life that's important to them, right? So I think the leader needs to be able to connect to people that way. You can call that engagement. You can call it, building empathy with your employees. But I think if you create a foundation that builds some trust and personalization there, People will be also more transparent with you when things are going wrong for them, right? So you can get in front of those things faster. So I think that's important for the leader around kind of building the EQ skills is a critical piece.
What would you say, actually, in thinking about that, what are ways that leaders can do that? I think the struggle is often leaders go, oh, yes, I know I want to do that. I have to do that. But, we get caught up in our day-to-day, right? There's always lots of Slack messages coming in. There's emails, there's fires to put out. And sometimes that stuff goes off to the wayside. So what are some of the things you talked about intentionality? What are some of the things that a leader could do to be really intentional about making sure that happens?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I did in my career, and I thought, helped me out a lot, was, I would set up one-on-ones. I had weekly one-on-ones with my people, and there was always a component of that at the beginning, which is, how are you doing? What's going on with you? It was really kind of figuring out, how that person was doing. How are they doing professionally? How are they doing with their personal life? If they want to share that, obviously. So I think that's how I kind of built it into. It was kind of an expectation of the conversation I would have with my people. I would just build it into those. And I think that's that intentionality. You just have to be consistent and intentional about, building those relationships.
It's good, Tom. In connection before content, right?
Exactly.
And I think in in a world where we're not together as often, we should never assume we know what's going on in someone else's life, professionally, personally, etc. When we're with them every day, stuff just kind of, when you're walking down the hall or whatever, and so there's a combination of humility and curiosity that I believe leaders need to have, but which they always would benefit from, but really like never before, today. And the last thing, accidental cultures are generally not good cultures. And so how do you just make this a core practice as a leader?
Yeah, I'd love to actually piggyback on that, Kerry. So a funny story comes to mind. When in the early days of the pandemic, I vividly remember kind of getting into a heated discussion with one of the company's co-founders in the parking lot, saying that, okay, we need to shut down, we need to send people home. And he was like, if we send them home now, they'll never come back. But essentially, and the reason that I'm bringing kind of this little anecdote up is, I think fundamentally one of the key skills that oftentimes is overlooked is knowing how to drive the autonomy of your teams. It's very much living by that premise of trust but verify, and it all goes back to how strongly you believe in the foundational elements of your performance management systems. If you feel confident and if you feel like your managers are provided with the tools to be successful, then it doesn't matter where they work from. And that's fundamentally what you should strive for to have on your teams, is that people can do their work day in and day out, and they have that psychological safety of coming to you when there's a blocker or there's an issue. And you shouldn't feel like you have to be on 24/7, because you know deep down that your people can take care of the team of themselves without you. So I think that's one of the key skills that all leaders should have.
Jumping on that, Leeza, you mentioned kind of having that foundation of the performance management process. If the company does not have that foundation, what can a leader do to kind of make up for that within their teams?
Yeah, that's a really great question. We are so fortunate to live in an age where I think that you can learn pretty much anything on any subject, and there is a plethora of resources that is available to you. Especially like Kerry put something in the chat from Microsoft, which I'm sure is excellent. Well, I think fundamentally with the leadership, with what leaders can actually do is a lot of leaders, they learn by example. And I think that if you're working in a company when there's tenured leadership who have their own kind of operating principles and agreements with the teams that are working well, I think it's incredibly important to learn from people who you respect and you admire, and you know their team is meeting the goals, and there's camaraderie, and there's engagement, and there's that commitment. So I think that's kind of the nearest resource that you can always use, is learning from your colleagues. I think that fundamentally, when it comes to performance management, there are so many tools out there that it becomes very easy to get distracted by, okay, maybe I should optimize for this platform or that platform, or do we use Excel, or do we use Jira, use something else? So I think it's really important early on to really narrow in on what are you going to use to track things. Where are you going to write down your team agreements? Where are you going to document your goals? How are you going to track your goals? And I know that some early stage companies, they tend to have, sometimes, I kid you not, hundreds of different systems that they implement, and 20 of those systems do the same thing. So you want to avoid redundance and just go with what works well and stay there.
Aaron, I
Kerry,
think,
go ahead.
Off of what Leeza was saying there, I think, hiring the best leadership talent is critical, right? And assessing that talent and finding out where the gaps are in that talent, and then truly following up with development with like a group, like an organization like Growthspace, right? With the coaching and the mentoring and the skill building capabilities that they have. I think that is essential. One of my biggest frustrations as a leader, as an HR leader, was hearing they're not ready this year, they're not ready this year, they're not ready this year. It was always next year, right? It's because we didn't intentionally go through and really build the skills of those leaders appropriately. And that's the criticality, that's the foundation of a successful organization, is to make sure that those leaders are ready to do battle, right? With the, with winning the market and being able to manage and get the best productivity and results out of their people.
Yeah, I remember when we talked prior to this and in preparation for this call, you mentioned learning agility, like hire for learning agility, hire for people that can be self-starters and that are able to take ownership over their growth and development. But then, of course, it is the organization's responsibility to set them up for success by providing the tools that they need to get to that next step. So thank you for sharing that. Kerry, didn't give you a chance to pipe in there, so I wanted to get your thoughts on.
I thought that was a great
skills that you thought are important.
I thought that whole notion of always learning is a great way to wrap things up, right? I mean, even on this hybrid thing, I think we're closer. I think we're closer to the beginning than we are to the end of this. I mean, there's a lot we don't know. There are a lot of questions that are going to need to be sorted through, and there's incredible diversity in terms of work context, right? What's possible in one company may not be possible in another, et cetera. And so I just think this idea of having that mindset of always learning may be the most important skill a leader needs today. So well said.
Yep, and I don't think that's something we have to sell to this audience, right? That's something everyone's going to agree with. All right, well, we are a minute over time, so wanted to thank all three of you for joining. I appreciate your insight and your expertise.